Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure today to rise to speak on the motion brought to us by the member from Davenport, a hard-working MP who has really been very, very passionate in making life more affordable and addressing all the silly charges, but not so silly because they have a real impact on people's lives. I should say hidden charges that customers are facing, and many times they don't even know it unless they examine their bills. What we're here today to talk about is that the government should ban all pay-to-pay practices by banks operating in Canada through the enactment of a mandatory financial code of conduct to protect consumers. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, here is something that I think all parties agree on. So just as they acted quickly on the tampon tax, I'm hoping that after the debate today, the Conservative government will move very, very quickly to implement this motion as well. And today, just so to make it clear, we're not talking about the gargantuan and outrageous fees charged by credit card companies when they lend money and through the credit cards, as well as the credit card fees. Nor are we talking about the huge burden on businesses, especially small and medium-sized businesses, with the transaction fees. What we're really here to talk about today is pay-to-pay billings that Canadians have started to receive. And some people may think that this means paycheck to paycheck. Well, Mr. Speaker, it does not. This particular term was coined by a young volunteer in Toronto, where he actually said you have to pay to pay. So it's really about having to pay a fine or a fee in order to pay a bill or to do some banking. That's what this is about. And in order to receive a paper billing, as you know, banks are charging some pretty hefty fees. But let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, that internet is not available to all Canadians. According to Stats Canada, 1 in 5 homes in Canada have no internet, and 46% of households with income below $30,000 have no internet. 40% of Canadian seniors don't use the internet. And let me tell you, I'm hearing from lots of constituents, both young at heart and others, about the impact of these fees on their day-to-day lives. So we have seniors who live on a fixed income, very limited income, that is not keeping pace with the cost of living, and then they're finding all these new fees cropping up all over the place. And Mr. Speaker, we're talking about some of our largest banks. You know, the 5 major banks, just in the first 2 quarters, made a profit of $16 billion in the first 2 quarters. And listen to this, RBC alone raked in $5 billion. And these are the banks that are, you know, saying, now we're going to charge you a fee to pay, whether it's to pay a bill or whether it's a fee to pay off your mortgage and many, many other things. But let me remind you, Mr. Speaker, RBC, as you know, was in the media quite a bit when they laid off hard-working, qualified Canadian workers and brought in temporary foreign workers to cut costs. And it's only when they got caught and the news was all over the media that they came out and became champions of jobs in Canada for Canadians. It's a bank that makes billions in profits, and yet it's charging hard-working Canadians and really putting pressure on our hard-working middle class and all those who aspire to be middle class, incredibly new pressures. It's very hard to imagine that banks are charging these fees. And I always thought automation would lead to a reduction of fees or elimination of fees. But it seems that's not so. And so through automation, not only have we seen some of the jobs disappear, many jobs disappear, but also now the banks are wanting to rake in even more money or steal more money from consumers. Canadians shouldn't have to hand over their hard-earned money just to receive a bank statement or pay a bill. Surely a bank you deal with, where you have your money deposited, money that banks gain from. You know, when they're paying you almost nothing in interest when you deposit your money, they're still charging you more than enough in the way of interest when you have money, when you take money out of the bank. And that can vary quite a lot, as we know, with credit card interest fees going up to 18, 21%. And of course, even borrowing from the bank can be very, very expensive. And yet when you put your money in the bank, you hardly get any return on that at all. Now the Conservative government, you know, they do the talk. They do the talk, and they are very, very famous for that. And what they do is they promise things over and over again. And each time they make it like as if they're making a new commitment. We're seeing that right now with the budget that they are promoting out there, the action plan that hasn't even been, hasn't gone through all the rinse cycles in the House or the Senate. And yet, this government announced in the 2013 speech from the throne that the Conservative finally would take action to, quote, end pay-to-pay policies so customers won't pay extra to receive paper bills. Then replex the same action in 2014 to eliminate the practice of pay-to-pay billing. But the resulting legislation that they did bring forward that dealt with telecommunication companies, guess what? They excluded banks that make billions of dollars in profit, and I am sure Canadians are thinking, what was the payola in return? Or what kind of lobbying took place, etc., etc. You know, Mr. Speaker, it's not that Canadians pay a small amount in these fees. There is a number, $180 million a year, just to receive bank statements. Nobody should be punished for receiving bank statements or paying their bills. And yet that's exactly what's happening with hard-working Canadians. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I have a quote here from, from hard-working Canadians and from our seniors. The Canadian Association of Retired Persons said, "It hardly seems fair that customers, through no fault of their own, are being charged $2 extra for the privilege of paying their bill. It's higher in some banks." And then the Public Interest Advocacy Centre recommends that the Government of Canada follows through on its commitment to eliminate the application of additional fees charged to Canadian consumers who receive a paper bill or statement. And Mr. Speaker, this issue, you know, it's not funny, but often comedy is used to show people who fail to understand how ridiculous some policies are. And fees for paper bills and statements were named a top contender for Canada's dumbest charge. A special series by CBC's Marketplace in October of 2013, beating out Ticketmaster fees, airline seat selection fees, and even ATM fees. So there are people out there who have been raising their voices, and no longer should Canadians have to wait for another promise to be made and not to be kept. I would urge my colleagues across the way to do what they did with the tampon tax, and let's get on with implementing this. And you know, Mr. Speaker, as we look at the struggles that Canadians are having to make ends meet, this would go a long way. This fee charge targets specifically and unfairly our seniors, those without internet access, and families who are already struggling to pay their bills. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, the other thing we have to take into consideration is a growing number of us, and I'm one of them, are concerned about online fraud and identity theft, and now we are being charged more and essentially penalized for banking offline. And so, Mr. Speaker, finally, I would really urge my colleagues, just as we did the Tampon Act, let's pass this today and then let's implement it by the end of the week. Thank you.